The first red line appeared beneath Clara Bennett's cloth at 11 minutes past midnight. Too dark to be rust, too deep to be wine, and far too old to belong to anyone still standing in the room. She had been brought to the DeLuca estate as a live-in restoration specialist. The ballroom was her assignment. Crumbling plasterwork along the east wall, water-damaged ceiling panels, tapestries that had not been properly treated in what Helena had described as a decade. She had not said why they had waited a decade. She pressed the testing cloth deeper into the plaster. A second line appeared, darker than the first. Her breath slowed. She had spent 9 years in restoration work, 7 on major civic and private contracts, the final 2 on projects that required her to see what had been deliberately hidden rather than simply neglected. She knew the difference between age and concealment. This wall had been concealed. She reached for the chemical indicator in the third pocket of her restoration kit. The reaction was immediate. A dull, oxidized brown bloomed outward through the plaster, like a bruise rising through skin. Clara set down the cloth and looked at what the surface had been hiding. Not 4 fingers splayed flat. Something narrower, long fingers. A palm dragged sideways by someone young, underfed, and bleeding badly enough to lose his footing. She applied the solution once more, just above the handprint. Letters appeared, shallow but deliberate, scratched into the wall before the paint had fully set. R-U-N. She did not run. She stood very still, in the middle of a ballroom, built like a throne room, in a house she had been inside for exactly 3 days, and understood that whoever had written those letters had not been able to follow their own advice. Roman DeLuca appeared in the doorway without a sound. What did you put on that wall? Nothing that creates blood. He crossed the room in 4 strides and studied the wall without touching it. The low light caught the lines of his face. For a moment he looked less like the man who had questioned her that first morning, and more like someone who had been expecting to find this, and had spent 10 years hoping he never would. How old? At least 10 years. He said nothing. Roman DeLuca had faced down a council of men who wanted his seat, survived 2 attempts on his life before he turned 30, and built the Viper organization into something his father had never managed, disciplined, precise, and feared beyond the boundaries of 3 ports. He had done all of it without blinking. One word beneath 10 years of paint made his jaw tighten. You will not touch this wall again. Clara looked at the letters still visible on the plaster. Then you already know why it was covered. He looked at her, the way people look when something they buried for a long time finds its way back to the light. That stain, he said quietly, has been there since the night my mother disappeared. He said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the ballroom, and the silence he left behind was the loudest thing in the room. 3 days earlier, Clara Bennett had arrived at the DeLuca estate the way most necessary decisions arrive. Without ceremony and with very little left to lose. She was good at what she did. She was also, as her last employer had put it, inconvenient. A woman who had refused to file an incident report, omitting the part where a contractor's negligence had put a man in hospital, and the project manager had asked her to describe it as a pre-existing condition. The contract ended. The man received his accurate report, eventually, after Clara submitted it independently. Clara received a quiet blacklist, and a very long silence from the industry she had given 7 years of her life to. She had seen the DeLuca listing on a public board, a restoration position at a private estate, unusual hours, live-in arrangement required. She had applied and heard back within 24 hours. When she arrived, Helena DeLuca told her the position had come through the recommendation of a former colleague. Clara had not named any colleagues in her application. Like every live-in woman on Helena's household roster, Clara was classified under domestic service, regardless of the expertise she had been hired to provide. She filed the discrepancy in the part of her mind reserved for things worth returning to. Helena received her at the main entrance with the composed warmth of a woman who understood exactly how much warmth each person required. Miss Bennett. Mr. DeLuca replaces anything in this house that is damaged beyond repair. Clara set her tool bag down on the stone step. That depends on who decides what repair means. Helena regarded her for a moment, a slight recalibration barely visible. Then she opened the door and led her inside. The 4 rules were delivered in the entrance hall before Clara had removed her coat. No entry to the ballroom after dark. No questions about Isabella. No moving the portraits on the main staircase. No disturbing Thomas. Thomas? The groundskeeper. Helena folded her hands once, neatly. He values silence. She paused at the base of the staircase. In this house, Miss Bennett, that is considered a virtue. Clara saw Thomas for the first time that afternoon, when she passed through the ballroom to begin her initial assessment. He was covering a section of the east wall with a heavy cloth, not the casual draping of someone protecting a surface during routine work. The careful, deliberate coverage of someone who had made a decision about that particular section of wall and intended it to stay made. When she stepped toward it, he turned. He touched the side of his neck without speaking. A long scar ran from below his ear to his collar, old and settled. Then he pointed at the wall, then at her. Then he shook his head once. She did not understand what he meant, but she remembered the gesture. Roman DeLuca she met in the study an hour later, delivering assessment files Helena had asked her to bring up. He was already in conversation when she entered, seated at the head of a long table, his voice low and unhurried. The kind of voice that had learned it did not need to rise. Across from him sat the council's chief elder, settled in his chair with the comfortable posture of someone who believed his position in any room was structural rather than earned. At the far side near the window stood Gideon Cross, the family's attorney, a man of perhaps 60, whose composure was the practiced kind, built over decades of situations where the wrong expression could cost you everything. 3 operations compromised in 2 months, Roman. The empire your father built does not survive a 4th. Roman turned a single page in the folder before him. Then let us make certain there is not a 4th. He said it with the calm of someone who had already identified the problem and was waiting for the room to catch up. Clara set the files on the side table quietly and prepared to leave. As she did, something on the topmost document stopped her. She had been looking at the restoration budget summary, and on the 3rd line, a procurement entry for a specific plaster compound used in the ballroom's east wall repair, billed 3 months ago. She recognized the compound. The manufacturer had discontinued it 8 years ago. A compound that no longer existed had been purchased 3 months prior, and billed to the estate's maintenance account, not to cover a financial irregularity, to establish a record that the east wall had received recent, documented, ordinary maintenance. Someone had been preparing the story of that wall long before Clara arrived. She set the file down, looked at the entry one more time to be certain. She was certain. She said nothing. She picked up her tool bag and walked out. Roman met her in the corridor 2 minutes later. "You found something in those files, a procurement entry for a discontinued compound. Discontinued when? 8 years ago. The entry is dated 3 months ago." Roman took the file from her hand without asking. "You are either very observant, Miss Bennett, or very dangerous. I have been called both." He turned back toward the study and said one sentence to Gideon Cross before the door closed. "Who authorized the East Wall maintenance account?" The interrogation came that evening. Same study, door closed. Roman asked questions the way he ran operations, without repetition, without visible urgency, with the patience of a man who understood that people reveal more when they believe the pressure is coming than when it has already arrived. Clara did not look away. She had been questioned before by men who had wanted her to soften what she had seen. She had learned in those rooms that the moment you drop your eyes, the other person decides what that means. She did not let him decide. "Why did Helena say your name came from a colleague's recommendation when you applied through a public listing?" "I don't know. Did anyone tell you what to look for in the ballroom?" "No." She held his gaze. "Why was that section of the east wall covered when I arrived?" "It has been covered for 10 years. Before you took the house or after?" He looked at her across the desk with the expression of someone who had just been asked a question they had been careful for a very long time not to ask themselves. He did not answer. The room Anna Reed had been given was 2 doors from Clara's own. Clara found it on the second night. The room had been cleaned but not fully cleared. In the back of the wardrobe, behind a panel pushed nearly flush, a restoration kit. Most of the tools were absent. 2 chemical compounds remained, including one in an amber bottle that matched the one in Clara's own bag precisely, down to the handwritten label. There was also a floor notation, hand-drawn. One section circled and labeled, "East Wall, Vent 4", and a piece of notepaper, the handwriting rapid and pressed, the way people write when they are not sure how much time they have. "The blood does not belong to Isabella. He survived. East Wall, Vent, Section 4. Do not clean before you." The sentence ended there. The pen had been set down quickly or had been taken. Anna Reed had come into this house and found exactly what Clara had found. She had prepared what she knew as carefully as she could for whoever was going to come next. She had not been able to finish. The following morning, Gideon Cross announced over breakfast that Anna Reed had died in a road accident approximately 3 weeks after leaving the DeLuca estate. He said it the way people deliver prepared information, watching Clara's face as he did. Clara asked whether the accident report contained scene photographs. He said he was not certain. She understood that the uncertainty was a choice. The earring appeared on Clara's 3rd day, small, gold, shaped like a jasmine flower. Wedged into the lower edge of the ventilation grill, near the base of the east wall. She brought it to Helena in the late afternoon. Helena went very still, for only a moment. Then she took it carefully into her palm and looked at it the way people look at objects that belong to the dead. Isabella wore that the evening she disappeared. Helena examined it once more, then placed it back in Clara's hand. Keep it somewhere secure until Roman sees it. Gideon Cross stepped into the corridor at that moment. His eyes moved to the earring in Helena's palm. His expression did not change. He excused himself before anyone addressed him directly. Clara watched him go. She had been misreading him. She had spent 2 days building a picture of Gideon Cross as the architect of whatever had happened in this house. His careful composure, his managed silences, his presence at every significant moment. That evening, she found him in the corridor near the records room and confronted him directly. "You knew about the east wall. I knew about a great many things in this house, and you reported none of them." He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Bennett, I have spent 10 years in a house controlled by a woman who holds a document that would end my career. I tried twice to move the copy outside the estate. Both couriers disappeared before reaching the city. My silence is not indifference. It is collateral. It was the most honest thing he had said since she arrived. It was also, she realized immediately, the admission Helena would have needed him never to make. Within earshot of walls that carried sound more efficiently than their builders intended. She had been so focused on Gideon that she had missed the more important question. Not who was silent, but who had arranged for the silence to be sufficient. And she had just announced, in a corridor that might not be empty, that Gideon was ready to break. Later that evening, Roman took her to his mother's room. She did not ask why. She understood from the way he moved through the door. With the care of someone approaching something they have decided to face honestly, that this was a decision he had not made before today. The room had not been touched, not preserved out of reverence, simply left exactly where it had been the last evening Isabella DeLuca occupied it, as if time had stalled here by the sheer refusal of anyone to acknowledge that she was not coming back. A portrait hung above the mantel, the canvas slightly warped from years of unregulated humidity. A single cut ran diagonally through the lower right corner. Not deterioration, not an accident. Someone had taken a blade to it and then stopped. Some things should be destroyed. Clara stood in front of the portrait for a moment. Then she crossed to it, opened her kit, and began working on the cut with a fine-tip adhesive applicator. Small, careful movements, pressing the separated canvas back together along the line of the damage. That is what people say when they are afraid restoration will show them what the original actually looked like. He did not answer. He came and stood beside her and held the portable lamp so the light fell at the angle she needed. He did not speak. He simply held the light, the way someone holds a door, not because they have to, but because they have decided to be useful in the only way available to them right now. They stood like that for several minutes. Two people looking at the same face, one trying to remember it, one trying to restore it. Clara set down the applicator and looked at what she had done. The cut was not gone, but it was closed. "She was not running from you," Clara said quietly. Roman did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was entirely even. "I am beginning to believe that." She crossed to the writing desk and opened the small side drawer. 3 envelopes unsealed. She looked at him. He nodded. The first letter began, "Roman, I did not choose another son over you." The second, Your father's firstborn child is still alive. The third contained one line only in a different hand. If I have not been able to tell you myself, look where the cypress shadows reach the east wall." Clara set the letters down and looked out the window toward the grounds. A long row of cypress trees ran along the garden's east boundary. At the near end, moving slowly between the hedgerows with a barrow of cut branches, was Thomas. Roman read each letter once. He folded them and placed them in his breast pocket. He remained at the desk. Clara did not fill the silence. She simply stayed. Clara returned to her room that night and found the earring gone from the mantel. It reappeared in the drawer of her bedside table by morning. She reported it to Helena. "A thief would have hidden it better," Helena said. Roman restricted Clara's movement within the house that afternoon. He said it without apology, without cruelty, with the flat certainty of a man acting on what he believed was the safest course. Clara stood in her room after the door was locked from outside and took stock of what she had. The floor diagram in her coat pocket, the amber bottle in her kit, the notepaper from Anna's room folded inside the lining of her jacket. And Thomas had left a small square of fabric tucked beneath the door gap before he walked away. Deep blue cloth, edged in gold thread. The particular shade she had seen in the portrait upstairs. Isabella's dress. The color of the evening Isabella DeLuca disappeared. She worked the lock with the slim probe from her kit. It took less than 4 minutes. The service corridor ran the full length of the east wing, narrow, lightless, designed for people whose movements were not meant to be noticed. Thomas was waiting at the far end. He led her without a lamp. At the base of the east wall section, he stopped. He removed a loose panel from the wainscoting and pointed inside. Behind it, a ventilation chamber, dry and tight. Within it, a velvet pouch, a roll of letters tied with string, a slim pendant chain, and a piece of old floorboard with a stain the color of dried rust. Inside the pouch were a small iron key and a folded packet sealed in oilcloth. Clara slipped both into her coat pocket. Clara crouched and looked at the stain. Not a child's hand. Narrower than Roman's hand, she could tell from the proportions. Long fingers. A palm dragged sideways by someone young, underfed, and bleeding badly enough to lose his footing. The letters were addressed only by name. Roman. She held the piece of floorboard and thought about a young man brought into a house where his existence was inconvenient, and a woman who had decided that inconvenience was not a reason to let someone be erased. Roman found them in the service corridor 9 minutes later. His voice had none of the measured control she had come to associate with him. What is he hiding? He moved toward Thomas before the sentence had finished, not with calculation, but with the unguarded urgency of someone who had been waiting for an answer for 10 years and had exhausted his supply of patience. Thomas did not move back. He stood and held Roman's gaze with the steadiness of someone who had already decided, a long time ago, that he was not going to be driven out of this house a second time. Clara stepped between them. "He is not afraid of you." Roman stopped. "He is afraid of what I will remember." Gideon Cross appeared at the far end of the corridor, carrying a folder. "If you harm him, you may be harming the only person your mother put her life at risk to protect." The corridor went very quiet. Roman looked at Gideon, then at Thomas, then at the piece of floorboard in Clara's hands. He did not speak for a long time. Thomas reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet. A single page, handwritten, passed to Roman without preamble. Roman opened it. He read it once. He looked up at the man standing across from him. Then Thomas wrote on a second sheet, slowly, in the clear, careful script of someone who had learned to make every word count, because he was never going to have the luxury of speaking them aloud. Roman read it. He stood very still. "How long have you been in this house?" Thomas wrote, 2 years, 4 months. Roman set the paper down. He looked at Gideon. "Tell me." Gideon had been 28 years old when he first held the document. Newly appointed to the DeLuca family's legal affairs, handed a sealed file by a woman who believed she might not survive the night. He had never believed himself brave. But standing with a certified copy of a birth certificate in his hands and Isabella DeLuca's trust placed carefully on his shoulders, he understood that he was the only person remaining who could do what she had asked. Elias DeLuca was the eldest son of Roman's father, born 1 year before Roman. Recognized privately, documented in full, and brought to this house 10 years ago by Isabella herself. Her intention was simple, to present the truth before the family council and let it stand on its own. She had been wrong. Helena had discovered the plan before the council met and acted with the precision of someone who had spent decades learning the exact moments at which a story could be quietly redirected. Elias had been 19 years old. He had entered through the East Passage, escorted by Isabella, carrying his documentation in a single folder. He had never reached the council chamber. What happened in the ballroom corridor had left Elias with a scar that ran from below his ear to his collar, and a voice he no longer possessed. Isabella had gotten him out through the service passages. She had pressed her earring into his hand at the east door and told him to go. He had gone. She had turned back to face what was coming. He never heard from her again. For 10 years, Gideon held the certified copy. He could not present it alone. Helena held documentation of the forged identity papers Gideon had created to keep Elias alive. Without the original or corroborating evidence, Helena could dismiss the copy as Gideon's forgery. He had tried twice to move it outside the estate. Both couriers disappeared before reaching the city. It was Anna Reed who changed the calculation. Anna had found the blood. She had contacted Gideon before she was removed from the house, prepared the compound and the instructions, and given them to Elias, who had been living under the name Thomas for 2 years and 4 months, brought back by Gideon through a groundskeeper hire that Helena had approved without recognition. She had believed for 10 years that the young man had died somewhere outside her gates. Anna died 3 weeks after leaving the estate. There had been no accident. When a new restoration specialist was hired, a woman whose record showed she had filed an accurate incident report at significant personal cost, Elias placed the amber compound in her kit the night before she was given her room. Gideon ensured her application reached the top of Helena's stack. Anna had prepared the compound. Elias had placed it in Clara's kit. Gideon had made certain that Kit and the woman carrying it entered the house. Roman stood at the window after Gideon finished, silent as someone who had just discovered the account was fundamentally wrong. "You knew." His voice was for Gideon. "You had a copy of the certificate for 10 years. I kept him alive. You kept me blind." He did not raise his voice. That, more than anything, landed precisely where he intended. He turned and looked at Elias, the way you look at something that was always present and that you have been, until this moment, choosing not to see. "Do you want my chair?" Elias took up his pen. He wrote without hurrying. He passed the sheet across. "I want my name before I decide what I want from it." Roman read it. He folded it and put it in the same pocket as his mother's letters. "Then we will start there." Before any of that could proceed, Roman needed to face one more thing. Clara had known it was coming. She waited until they were alone in the corridor. "Anna Reed came to you." Roman turned. "She told you she had found the blood, and she believed there was a living heir. He said nothing, and you signed the order to remove her from the house. Helena told me she was making accusations to destabilize the succession. Helena told you." The words landed quietly, but they landed. You did not fail to notice what Anna was saying. "Roman, you heard enough of it to know it was dangerous, and you chose to remove her before she could finish. I did not know she would die. No, but you knew why she was asking, and you took away her ability to keep asking." He held her gaze. He did not argue. There was nothing to argue with, and he was not a man who argued with things that were true. "You protected the version of this house that asked nothing from you," Clara said. "That is not the same thing as protecting this house." He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally, "it is not." She did not move to leave. She was close enough that she could see the exact moment he stopped carrying the weight as something he was managing and started carrying it as something that was simply his. "What happens now?" she asked. "For the house or for us?" It was the first time he had said that word. "Us." She let it stay in the air between them. "Both," she said. He looked at her. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. It was the most honest thing he had said since she arrived. And honesty, she had learned, was where things could begin. Helena moved before any of them were ready. She had been 3 rooms away, and the conversation Clara had held with Gideon in the corridor had given her exactly the warning she needed. Clara's mistake had cost them the element of surprise. Roman discovered Clara and Elias were gone and moved immediately, summoning every senior council member before he descended to the basement. What happened next could not be witnessed by only one man. By the time Roman reached the main corridor, Clara and Elias were already held by 2 members of the estate's overnight security. Men who answered not only to Roman, but to the woman who had run this house's operations for 30 years. The basement of the DeLuca estate was cold and lightless. Through the ceiling, Clara could hear the particular sharp smell of something burning. Not wood, paper, old paper, burning fast and clean, the way documents burn when they have been arranged to burn. Helena's voice came through the door. "You should have cleaned what you were told to clean." "Miss Bennett." Clara looked at the wall opposite, then at her coat pocket. "That was your mistake," she said. She heard Helena pause. "You believed cleaning and erasing were the same thing." She took out the amber bottle. She thought about Anna Reed, who had prepared this compound and given it to a young man who could not speak, who had carried it for 2 years and 4 months and placed it in the kit of a woman he had never met. She uncapped it. She began at the back wall. The compound spread across the dry stone with the speed of something that had been waiting for exactly this surface. For several seconds, nothing. Then the first mark appeared, a heel, then a drag line, long, uneven, the mark of weight being moved without its owner's cooperation, then a hand, not a child's. Long fingers, a broad palm pressed against the stone by someone trying to find purchase and failing. Then a trail, unbroken, leading from the point where the drag marks ended directly toward the south wall, where the estate's original architectural drawings showed nothing. No door, no passage, no structural reason for the wall to be what it was. Elias looked at the trail. He picked up the heaviest tool remaining in her kit and crossed to the south wall. He pressed the probe against the stone systematically, section by section. When the tone changed, low and resonant where it should have been solid, he pressed harder. Above them, smoke was beginning to filter through the ceiling joists. The plaster gave, not stone behind it. Brick, laid loosely, the mortar aged, but not fully cured. He looked at her. She nodded. He worked fast. The bricks came away in pieces as the smoke thickened and the air shortened. Clara pressed her sleeve against her mouth and kept working, tracking each new mark as it surfaced, reading the trail Helena had spent 10 years trying to erase. Then the brick gave way entirely, and Elias stopped. On the other side of the wall was not a hidden chamber, it was a door. A real door, old wood, sealed from the outside with a padlock that had rusted shut. The key. The small key from the velvet pouch in the vent. Clara had it in her coat pocket. She crossed to him and pressed it into his hand. He inserted it. The lock released. Beyond it, a chamber no larger than a generous closet. The air inside ancient and absolutely still. 2 things lay on the floor. The first, the original birth certificate. Elias DeLuca, father acknowledged, dated, witnessed, and sealed beyond any claim of Gideon's forgery. The second, a single sheet in Isabella DeLuca's handwriting, a plain account of what had happened and what she understood was coming, ending with one line, "I did not abandon my sons, neither of them." The third piece of evidence had come from the vent. Clara opened the oilcloth packet. Inside were copied pages from Helena's private disbursement ledger, with a note in Anna's hand confirming their source. Column headings, dates, amounts, initials. One entry, dated before Anna left, ordered a road accident to be staged 3 weeks later. Another recorded the transportation and disposal of Isabella DeLuca's body. The authorization beneath both was the same, Helena DeLuca. Clara heard the basement door open. Roman stood at the top of the stairs with 8 members of the family council arranged behind him. He had not come alone because truth inside a mafia house was only as useful as the number of powerful men forced to witness it. Helena stood at the foot of the stairs. She held a small revolver, the kind kept in side-table drawers for occasions that were not supposed to arrive. "Everything I did was for you." Roman descended 4 steps. "Everything you did was to make certain I never had a choice. If he takes your name, he takes everything you built. Then I will find out whether what I built follows my blood or my judgment." He held her gaze. "I am hoping it is the second one." Helena's composure did not break. 30 years had made her very good at the surface. She raised the revolver toward Elias. Roman was already moving. Not strategy, not calculation. The same motion that had brought him across a study the moment he saw something wrong on a procurement document. Some responses in him operated below the level of choice. He took the weapon from her hand. Elias had not moved back. He stood exactly where he had been standing, not from bravado, from the particular steadiness of someone who had already spent 10 years in the aftermath of what Helena had done to him and had no energy remaining for the dramatic version of this moment. He simply waited for it to be finished. Roman held the revolver at his side. He looked at the council assembled on the stairs. He looked at Gideon. He looked at the open chamber behind Clara and the evidence gathered before him. Bring a light. The birth certificate was read aloud by Gideon Cross in the presence of the full council. Isabella's account was read after it. Then the copied ledger pages, including the orders for Anna's death and the disposal of Isabella DeLuca's body, were read aloud before 8 silent senior men of the Viper organization. The House requires a decision. Roman looked at Elias. Elias looked back. Roman reached into his jacket and produced a single-page document, terms he had written in his own hand, on the stairs while the council was still absorbing what the ledger contained. He set it on the table. Elias read it. He read it a second time. He crossed out one clause, the one specifying that executive authority reverted automatically to the eldest son after 12 months, and wrote above it, in his careful script, determined by council assessment of demonstrated leadership, both parties eligible. He slid it back. Roman looked at the amendment. He picked up the pen. He signed it. Elias signed beneath him, his full name, the one that had been taken from him, written clearly for the first time in 10 years. Elias DeLuca. Roman addressed the council. Elias DeLuca's name is restored with immediate effect. He receives his documented share of the estate and a seat on this council. Executive authority is retained by current leadership for 12 months, at which point the council assesses both of us, not by birth order, but by what we have actually done. Helena DeLuca stood without the revolver, without the name, without the 30 years of structure she had built for reasons she had believed were generous and correct and necessary. Roman looked at her for a long moment. The way he looked at her was not the look of a man facing an enemy. It was the look of a man facing someone who had taught him how to hold a weapon, and how to hold a room, and how to walk into a council of older men and not show fear. Someone who had fixed his collar before every meeting since he was 15 years old. Death would allow you to leave as a martyr. He set the revolver down on the ledge beside him. Your name will remain in the family record. Every entry in it will be accurate, including everything you did beneath it. You will live long enough to watch this house correct the record you spent 30 years writing. Helena said nothing. Her composure held so completely that it was almost convincing, until Roman turned away. And in the half-second before she recovered, Clara saw the expression underneath. Not remorse. Something older and smaller than remorse. The look of someone who had believed, completely and for 30 years, that she was right, and had just understood, for the first time, that being right and being justified were not the same thing. She was placed under guard before dawn and turned over to federal investigators under a sealed case Gideon had prepared, limited to the murders, the forged maintenance records, and the security men who had served her. 3 things were formally entered into the DeLuca family record in the days that followed. Elias DeLuca's name restored. Isabella DeLuca's account preserved as testimony. Anna Reed's name added to the record alongside them. Restoration specialist, The first person to identify the evidence in the east wall died in service of the truth this house spent 10 years concealing. Clara was present when the notary sealed that last entry. She thought the notation was insufficient. She thought the best available substitute was truth in the record, clear enough that no one could remove it quietly. Anna had probably known that too. After the notation was sealed, Roman found her in the records room and asked her to walk with him. He did not say where. She followed him through the east wing to the far end of the ballroom corridor, to the door of a small anteroom Isabella had used as a sitting room, a room that had been locked for 10 years and stood open now. On the right side of the doorframe, at approximately shoulder height for someone who had been much shorter when it was made, 2 notch marks had been cut into the wood. A pencil line beside the first. A name in a child's careful lettering, Roman. A second notch, slightly higher, beside it, Elias. And above both, in a different hand, the hand she had come to know from letters and documents, and one plain account written in a basement with limited time. My sons. Clara looked at the frame for a long time. Roman stood beside her. He reached out and touched the mark beside his name. Just his fingertips, briefly. The way you touch something you are not yet certain is real. She thought about restoration, about what it meant to work backward through the layers of what something had been forced to become until you reached what it had always been underneath. Not to make it new, to make it honest. They stood there without speaking for a while. Then Roman said, "Is that the last one?" She looked around the room. In this house, she looked at him. I doubt it. He turned to her. There was something different in his face now. Not the controlled evenness of the first 3 days, not the unguarded urgency of the service corridor. Something quieter than both. I owe you an honest answer to something. When I restricted your movement, when I had your room locked, I told myself it was for your safety. But there was another reason. Clara waited. I had seen what happened to people who ask the right questions in this house, and I did not want you to become the next person I was going to have to stop asking about. He said it plainly, which made it land harder than anything complicated would have. Clara was quiet for a moment. She had a contract offer from a civic institution in another city, carried in the same pocket as Anna's floor diagram, unopened since the day she arrived. You locked me in to protect me, she said, not to protect the house. Yes, those are 2 different things. I know. She looked at him. Then ask me to stay as Clara, not as your restoration specialist. Roman held her gaze, steadily, the way he held everything he had decided to keep. I want you here, he said, not because the walls need you. The walls are going to need you for years, and you know it. The corner of his mouth moved. Stay because I do. She reached up and placed her hand against the side of his face. He went still. Then I'm staying, she said. But the walls get me during business hours. She kissed him once, briefly, deliberately, before the house could interrupt them again. She negotiated her terms the following day, in the library, without intermediaries. Full access to every surface in the house, complete documentation authority. No instruction to conceal, avoid, or leave any section of any wall in a state that did not reflect its actual history, and a title that meant something. Head of Estate Restoration and Preservation. Roman agreed to every term without revision. A small brass plate appeared on the door of the restoration office 3 days after that. He was standing beside it when she arrived in the morning. He looked at the plate, then at her. "Do you intend to uncover every wall in this house, Director Bennett?" She picked up her tool bag, only the ones that are still covering something. He held the door open. She walked through it, and his hand settled briefly at the small of her back before she crossed the threshold. A gesture small enough to mean nothing, and precise enough to mean everything. And somewhere in the structure of the house, in the plaster and stone and old wood that had been holding its history for 10 years without being asked, something settled, very quietly, into the position it had always been meant to occupy. Was Roman right to remain Viper Boss while restoring Elias's name and inheritance, or should Elias have taken control as the firstborn son? Share your answer in the comments below, and subscribe to Mafia Hearts and Secrets for more dangerous love stories buried inside the walls of the underworld.